At 5:02 in the morning, a woman who had not spoken above a murmur in 9 years said 5 words into a dark room, and they were not for anyone alive. Please don't hit me. Beside her, a man who had ordered other men to disappear lay perfectly still and understood that he had married a stranger. He had signed a document with her. He had never once asked her a question, and now something in her sleep was begging, and whatever it was begging at had a face and a name and an address. By 5:40, Cassius Ferrante had stopped every truck on the Georgia coast. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, because it does not go where you think it goes. And drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can see how far this one has traveled. The whisper did not wake him because he had not been asleep. Cassius Ferrante had lost the ability to sleep through a full night somewhere around his 26th year when he learned what his father actually did for money, and he had never gotten it back. He lay in the dark most nights running the same arithmetic he ran in the daylight. Which lane was slow? Which name had stopped answering? Which of the 11 men who reported to him was 3 months from becoming a problem and did not know it yet? That night, the arithmetic was about a customs supervisor in Garden City who had gone quiet on a Tuesday and stayed quiet through the weekend, which meant either a family emergency or a federal one, and there was no third option. So he was awake and staring at nothing when the woman he had been legally married to for 6 weeks made a sound. It was small. It was not a word yet. It was the sound a person makes when their body starts running before their mind gives permission. And he recognized it the way a mechanic recognizes a bearing about to fail. He turned his head. She was on her side facing away from him, and she was shaking. Not shivering, shaking. Her whole spine was involved. Her hands had found the edge of the pillowcase and were holding it the way people hold things when they believe they are about to be moved against their will. Then she said it. Please don't hit me. Cassius Ferrante had heard a great many things in 44 years. He had heard a grown man promise God anything in exchange for 1 more hour. He had heard his own mother lie to a priest with her hand on his shoulder. He had heard the particular silence that settles over a room after a decision has been made and before it has been carried out. And he had learned to sit inside that silence without flinching, because flinching was the thing his father had beaten out of him first. Nothing had ever done to him what those 4 words did. He did not touch her. That was the first correct thing he did that night, and it was pure instinct, and he never took credit for it afterward. He simply said her name, once, low, the way you'd say it across a room. She came awake so fast it was violent. She did not sit up slowly and blink and ask what time it was. She came off the mattress with one arm already up, folded across her face at the elbow palm, out the exact geometry of a person protecting the orbital bone, and her eyes were open and seeing nothing at all. For about 2 full seconds, she was not in that house. She was somewhere else entirely, and whatever was in that other place had already started moving toward her. Then the room assembled. He watched it happen. He watched her recognize the ceiling, then the window, then him, and he watched her arm come down slowly, joint by joint, like she had to negotiate with it. And the first thing out of her mouth was not, "Are you all right?" or "What happened?" or "I had a nightmare." It was a question, and it landed on him like a diagnosis. What did I say out loud? He did not answer immediately. He was still processing the shape of it. Not did I say something, not was I loud. She had asked which words had escaped because she had a list, and she needed to know which item on the list had gotten out, and she was already calculating what it would cost her. Nothing, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and he understood with total clarity that she knew he was lying and had decided to accept the lie, and that she had a great deal of practice accepting lies that were offered as kindnesses. Okay, she said. Then she got up, apologized for the disturbance in the flat voice of a hotel employee, and walked out of the room. He heard the water run in the hall bathroom for 4 minutes. He counted. Then he heard nothing, which was worse because it meant she was sitting on the edge of the tub in the dark, waiting for her heart rate to come down so she could return without evidence on her face. Cassius Ferrante lay in the dark and did the only thing he had ever been taught to do with a feeling. He converted it into an action. Tyke. By 5:20, he was downstairs with a phone in his hand, and by 5:28, Boone Isles was on the other end of it, sounding like a man who had answered on the first ring for 11 years and intended to keep the streak alive. Cassius asked one question. He asked what the Ferrante organization touched Tidewater Memorial Hospital. Boone did not ask why. That was his entire value proposition as a human being. He took 90 seconds and then he laid it out, and the answer was nearly everything. Linens, surgical disposables, the contract that moves sterile trays, 2 of the 3 food service accounts, the bonded warehouse that held pharmaceutical shipments before they cleared the last mile. Not because the Ferrantes had schemed their way into a hospital, but because the Ferrantes had spent 40 years owning the space between a container ship and a loading dock, and a hospital is just a building that eats 1,000 pallets a month. Cassius listened to the whole list without speaking. Then he gave the order, and it was the most decisive thing he had done in a year, and it was completely and catastrophically wrong. Nothing moves to Tidewater Memorial until I say it moves. Not a box, not a napkin. Starting now. He hung up and stood there and felt something that was almost relief, because he had done a thing, and doing a thing was how he had always translated the unbearable into the manageable. It took 11 hours for the consequences to arrive, and they did not arrive at the address he had aimed them at. I knew almost nothing about the woman upstairs, and this was not an accident. It was the architecture of the arrangement. 6 weeks earlier, she had walked into the freight office on Bay Street without an appointment and without an introduction. And she had gotten past 2 men whose entire job was to prevent exactly that. And she had done it by carrying a folder and wearing the expression of a person delivering something that had already been approved by someone more important. That was the first thing Cassius had noticed about Ren Alcott. She had understood instinctively that invisibility is a costume, and she wore it like she had been fitted for it. She had put a 2-page memorandum on his desk and stood there while he read it. He had wanted at first to have her removed. Then he had reached the bottom of page 1. The memorandum did not threaten him. That was what made it terrifying. It simply described in the flat clinical grammar of a hospital chart the condition of his organization's paperwork. It noted that his manifests were maintained by 4 different people using 3 different conventions, none of them documented. It noted that his bonded warehouse logs and his customs filings disagreed with each other in a way that was not criminal but was indefensible. And that indefensible was worse than criminal, because criminal you could argue, and indefensible you could only apologize for. It noted the retention schedule he was legally required to keep and the retention schedule he was actually keeping, and the gap between them was 8 years wide. And on the last line it said, without any adjectives at all, that he was roughly 90 days from an audit that his paper would not survive. He had looked up at her. She was maybe 5'3". She had a hospital badge clipped to a cardigan and the general presence of a woman who had spent a decade being walked past. "Who sent you?" he had said. "Nobody sends me anywhere," she had said. "That's the whole point of me." Then she had told him what she wanted, and it was the strangest price anyone had ever asked him for anything. She did not want money. She named a figure for the work itself, and it was modest. And she said she'd take it in a check from a legitimate entity because she needed the tax record. What she wanted was the name. She wanted to be married to him, not a relationship, not an arrangement in the way the old families used to mean it, with a church and 2 sets of parents doing arithmetic in the back pew. She wanted a legal marriage on paper, filed and public and searchable, because there were certain people in Savannah who could be reasoned with and certain people who could not. And she had exhausted every method of protection that existed inside the law, and she had concluded that the only thing left that worked was a wall. She had said the word wall like a woman naming a tool she'd already priced out. Cassius had asked her the obvious question. He had asked what she was afraid of, and she had said that's not part of the offer. It should have ended there. Any sane man would have had her escorted to the sidewalk. Instead, he had looked at page 2 of the memorandum again, at a woman who had reconstructed the skeleton of his entire logistics operation from public filings and shipping schedules and a great deal of patience, and he had thought, I would rather have this person inside my house than outside of it. So he had said yes. They were married 8 days later in a county office by a clerk who did not look up. She kept her own residence for 2 weeks and then moved into the house above the river, because a wall you don't live behind isn't a wall. They took separate rooms until the 3rd week, when a Ferrante cousin came to dinner and had to be shown a bedroom. And after that, neither of them ever quite got around to moving back, and neither of them discussed it, and nothing had happened in that room except sleep. In 6 weeks, he had learned 4 things about her. She woke at 4:40 every morning without an alarm. She ate standing up. She read paper documents with a mechanical pencil in her hand and made small tick marks in the margin, and she never wrote a word, only ticks, and he had no idea what the ticks meant. And she flinched at the sound of a door closing hard every single time and always covered it within half a second by reaching for something with the same hand. 4 things, 6 weeks. And then at 5:02 in the morning, she had said, "Please don't hit me," to the dark, and he had realized that he had been living with a war and had not once asked who was fighting it. I'm on the second phone call at 6:15, and he made it to a woman named Odile who had no title inside his organization and no name on any document connected to it, and whose entire professional existence consisted of finding out things about people within 48 hours and never once asking why. He gave her a name. He gave her a date of birth. He told her to pull everything, and he was specific about everything. Employment licensure, credit court filings, protective orders, sealed and unsealed hospital admissions, if she could reach them in any prior marriage. Odile was quiet on the line for a moment. Then she asked in the neutral tone of a professional confirming a shipping address whether he understood that the subject was his wife. Yes, he said. She said she'd have it by 2. She had it by 11:40, which meant it had not been difficult, which was its own piece of information, and she sent it to the secure server and called to say it was there and said nothing else about it. And that was also information because in 9 years, Odile had never once editorialized, and she came very close that morning. What she said right before she hung up was, "Read it somewhere you can sit down." Cassius put the file on his desk. He looked at it for 4 hours. He did not open it. He would spend a long time after party trying to explain to himself why, and the closest he ever got was this at 5:02. That morning, a woman had asked him, "What did I say out loud?" And the question underneath the question had been, "How much did you take from me while I was unconscious?" And he understood that if he opened that file, he would be taking the rest of it. He would be reaching into a person and removing the only thing she had left that was fully hers, which was the right to decide who knew. And he had built an entire life on the principle that information is the only real currency. He had never once in 44 years declined to take some. He sat with the folder closed under his hand, and outside the window, the morning came up over the river, gray and flat, and somewhere in the city. His order was moving down through 11 layers of men who did not know why they were following it. The embargo did what embargoes do, which is that it went around the person it was aimed at and landed on everyone else. By 10 that morning, Tidewater Memorial had missed a linen delivery, and by noon, the sterile processing department was running on reserve. And by 2, the food service manager had rewritten every patient tray in the building around what was already in the walk-in. Not one administrator noticed. That was the thing Cassius had failed to model. A hospital vice president does not learn that linens are short. A hospital vice president learns that a metric moved. The person who learns that linens are short is the woman on the night shift with a cart and a badge and 11 years of service who now has to strip a room and cannot, and who will be written up for the time she loses walking to the other tower to find a stack. Rin came home at 7:40 that evening, which was late for her. She came into the kitchen and put her bag down and did not take her coat off, and Cassius understood immediately that something had gone wrong in a way that involved him. She asked him one question. She asked whether he had stopped the freight. He said yes. He said it without hedging, because whatever else he was not a man who hid behind a middle manager. And then Ren Alcott, who had spoken to him in 6 weeks in the register of a competent contractor and had never once raised her voice, looked at him across the counter and said, the first genuinely furious thing she had ever said out loud to another human being. "You just took the pillowcases off 140 beds, and the only person in that building who has not been inconvenienced by you today is the man you did it for." He did not answer. There was no answer. She was correct entirely and immediately, and in a way that reorganized something in his chest. "Rosalie Duarte worked a double tonight because she couldn't strip her rooms on schedule," Ren said. "She's 52. She's been in that building since 1994, and she got written up for it, and she can't afford to be written up, and you will never know why. She can't afford it, and it is not my place to tell you." She picked her bag back up. "Turn the trucks back on." "Tell me his name," Cassius said. "No." "Ren." "You want to help," she said, and her voice did something, then dropped into a place that was not anger anymore, and it was worse. "I believe that. but you help the way a hammer helps. Everything you did today was force, and force is exactly what he uses, and he is better at it than you are, because he does it inside a system that is designed to believe him. You cannot hit him. If you hit him, he becomes a victim of organized crime, and I become a woman who married organized crime. And every single thing I have spent 9 years building turns into a defense exhibit for him. He turned the trucks back on that night. It took 40 minutes. He did it himself on the phone in front of her. Then he did something he had never done in his life, which was ask a person what he should do instead. She sat down. That was the first crack. She did not tell him anything that night, not really. What she did was take the clothes folder off his desk, which she had noticed at some point during the day and had said nothing about, and put it on the counter between them. You had me pulled, she said, not accusatory, almost admiring, like she had expected it and would have thought less of him if he hadn't. I did. When? 6:15 this morning. She looked at the folder. It had a rubber band around it. It had never been off. I didn't open it, he said. That was the sixth thing he said to her that night, and it was the one that mattered. She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched something happen behind her face that he could not read, because it was not gratitude and it was not relief. It was closer to recalculation. She had a model of men in her head built over many years at enormous cost, and he had just failed to behave the way the model predicted, and she was now deciding whether that was data or noise. Why not, she said. Because you asked me at 5 in the morning what you'd said out loud. He kept his voice flat. You were asking how much I'd taken. I'd already taken it. It was sitting on my desk while you were asking. Ren Alcott put her hand on the folder. She did not open it either. And then she said the thing that reframed the entire 6 weeks, and she said it almost casually, the way a person mentions something they have known so long, they have stopped noticing it's remarkable. I have a better one. He waited. That file cost you a phone call and 4 hours, she said. Mine took 9 years. She told him a version of it that night. Not the whole thing, not the storage unit, not the 416 pages, not the shoebox. She gave him the outline and nothing else. And even the outline took 2 hours, and she told it the way she did everything in chronological order, without adjectives. She had been married before. 7 years. Her husband was a trauma surgeon at Tidewater Memorial named Elliot Kearns, and she had met him when she was 24 and had been promoted into the medical records department, and he had been 38 and already the most talented pair of hands in the building. He had not hit her for the first 3 years. Cassius noticed the construction of that sentence and did not comment on it. What he had done for 3 years, she said, was smaller and more architectural. He had been the person who explained her to herself. He had a gift for it. He would describe her motives back to her with such precision and such apparent generosity that she would agree with the description, and then a month later, she would realize the description had contained a small poison, and by then she had already accepted it as her own thought. He told her friends were a drain on her energy, and she agreed, and then there were no friends. He told her that her sister Camille was competitive with her, which was true, and used the true thing to make the sister unreachable. He told her that she was frightened of ambition, and he used that to move her out of a residency-adjacent track and into an archival role where she would be safe. He never once lied to me, she said, and Cassius understood that this was the most horrifying sentence in the account. He told me true things in an order that produced a false conclusion. That's the entire method. You can't fight it because every individual piece of it is accurate. The first time he hit her, she went to the emergency department in her own hospital, and the attending that night was a colleague of his, and the chart said she'd fallen against the corner of an open cabinet door. She had watched him write it. She had stood there in a gown and watched a physician document a lie about her body into a permanent legal record, and the physician had not been malicious, had in fact been kind to her, had squeezed her hand. He had simply believed Elliot because Elliot was the best surgeon in the building, and had a wife who was a little anxious and a little clumsy, and that story was easier to hold than the other one. That was the night I understood, she said. Understood what? That he wasn't going to be stopped by anybody telling anybody anything. She said it without heat. Words go into the air and die. He owns the air in that building. But that chart is going to exist for the rest of my life. It's in a system with a retention schedule. It'll outlive him. It'll outlive me. She looked up. He didn't hurt me and then lie about it. He hurt me and then filed it. And once I understood that I understood what the actual weapon was. Cassius asked what she meant. And Ren Alcott, medical records archivist, 33 years old, a woman who had been made small on purpose by an expert, said the sentence that would govern everything that came after. He put me in the record, she said, so I started putting him in it. She had gone to work the next Monday. She had not left him for another 4 years, and she was clear about why, and she did not soften it. She had nowhere to go and no money that was not his and no friends he had not removed and a sister who had been taught to see her as a rival. She said it flat. She said she was tired of the version of this story where the woman leaves in the second act because she found her strength. Because that was a fantasy written by people who had never had to price out a security deposit while their arm was in a sling. What she had instead of an exit was a job in medical records and a photographic instinct for paper. So for 9 years in a building where she was the least noticed person on any given floor, Ren Alcott read, she read the chart he wrote about her, and then she read the chart he wrote about a 19-year-old motorcycle rider who came in on a Thursday in 2016 and left in a bag on a Friday. And she noticed that the operative note had been amended at 3:14 in the morning by his credentials, 11 hours after the death, and that the amendment moved a decision by 40 minutes. She did not do anything about it. She made a tick mark in the margin. She read the chart of a woman with a perforated bowel whose imaging report and whose radiology film did not agree, and she made a tick mark. She read a fall report on a man in the neuro tower, and then 6 months later in a stack of night shift paperwork nobody had ever asked her to look at. She read a handwritten note from an environmental services worker named Rosalie Duarte, describing the same fall completely differently, and she made a tick mark, and then she sat in the annex for 20 minutes and did not move. Because the second document did not exist. Not officially, there was no field for it. There was no system it fed into. Rosalie Duarte and 11 other people who cleaned those rooms had been writing down what they saw for years in notebooks on the backs of supply forms because they had eyes and consciences and no standing whatsoever. And every one of those pages went into a shoebox in a locker because there was nowhere else on earth for it to go. The hospital had built a system that recorded what physicians said had happened. It had not built one anywhere that recorded what the people mopping the floor had actually watched. That's the part nobody wants to hear, Ren said. He's not powerful because he's strong. He's powerful because the building only takes testimony from people it has already decided are credible. Everybody else in that building is furniture. Cassius Ferrante, who ran a criminal organization on the principle that the man who controls the manifest controls the cargo, sat in his own kitchen at 1 in the morning and understood that he had married someone who thought exactly the way he did about something infinitely more dangerous. He asked finally the question that had been standing in the room since 5 o'clock that morning. He asked why she was still afraid if the marriage had ended 4 years ago and the man had never come near her since. And she told him that Elliot Kearns had not come near her because he had not needed to, and that a man like that does not chase, he waits, and that in the 4 years since the divorce she had received exactly one communication from him, a birthday card unsigned with nothing written in it, delivered to an address she had never given him. Then she told him the rest, and it was the reason she had walked into his freight office 6 weeks ago, and it was the reason for the wall. 11 weeks ago, a hospital attorney had begun a records review of the archival department. Routine, the memo said, 90 days, and Ren, who had spent 9 years learning to read the difference between a routine action and a routine-shaped action, had gone home and sat on her floor and understood that somebody had finally noticed that the quietest employee in the building had been reading things for a decade. She had 11 weeks to get 416 pages out of a legal position. She could not defend, and no license to lose them over, and no institution that would protect her, and no money and no name. So she had gone and bought one. Cassius sat with that. Then he said the seventh thing, and it came out of him rougher than he intended. You could have asked me for help. I did, she said. I asked you for exactly the help you can actually give. You cannot fix this. You'd try and you'd do the thing you did today with the trucks, and it would land on Rosalie again. She stood up. She put the unopened folder back on the counter and slid it toward him. What I needed was a name that makes lawyers slow down. That's what you had. That's what I bought. It was a fair trade, and I don't feel bad about it. She went upstairs. Cassius stayed in the kitchen with 2 files in front of him. One of them, his and unopened one of them, hers and not present. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not know what the next action was. At 4:40 the next morning she was up, because she was always up at 4:40. At 6 she called down the hall to him, and something in the pitch of it got him moving before his mind caught up. She was standing with her phone in her hand, and the hospital's internal announcement open on the screen, the kind of bulletin that goes out to 9,000 employees and is read by 400, and she had gone the color of paper. Because the Georgia Composite Medical Board had announced its new appointments effective the first of the month, and there in the third paragraph in the tone of institutional pride was the name of a trauma surgeon from Tidewater Memorial who had been recognized for 2 decades of clinical excellence and appointed to the board that licensed, investigated, disciplined, and revoked every physician in the state. Ren Alcott read it twice. Then she set the phone down very carefully, the way a person sets down something they are afraid they will throw. They just made him the judge, she said. And Cassius Ferrante, who had spent his entire adult life believing there was no problem that could not be solved by finding out who to lean on, looked at that screen and understood that he had finally found a man he could not reach, standing on the floor. He could not buy, holding a gavel that would be pointed at the only person in the world he had promised to be a wall for. She did not throw the phone. She put it face down on the counter, and then she stood there with both hands flat on either side of it, and Cassius watched her breathe through it the way a person breathes through a contraction, counting, waiting for the top of the wave. "How long has he known?" she said. "Known what?" "That review of my department started 11 weeks ago. The board vets appointments for 6 months minimum." She turned around. "He knew he was getting this in April. He started the review in June. He didn't order that review because somebody noticed me. He ordered it because he was about to become untouchable, and he wanted the house clean before he moved in." Cassius did the arithmetic and did not like the answer. "Then the review isn't routine." "Nothing he does is routine. That's the entire problem with him. Every single thing he does has a defensible explanation sitting on top of it, ready to go, and the explanation is always true." She picked up her bag. "I need to show you something, and I need you to not say anything until I'm finished, because if you interrupt me, I will lose my nerve, and I have exactly one nerve left." "Where, Thut?" "Garden City. Bring a car nobody knows." He brought a car nobody knew. The storage facility was 4 rows of orange doors behind a fence off Bourne Avenue, the kind of place where people put a dead parent's furniture and then pay $81 a month for 9 years rather than decide what it meant. She had the gate code memorized. She had the padlock key on the same ring as her house key, which meant she had carried it on her body every day, through every shift, through every one of those years, and Cassius noticed that and filed it. She rolled the door up herself. She did not let him do it. There was no furniture in it. There was one folding table, one chair, 4 plastic file boxes with the lids on, and a shoebox. That was all. 9 years fit into a space the size of a small bedroom, and most of the space was empty because she had never had enough at any one time to justify more than she could carry in a tote bag past a security desk without changing the shape of her walk. She sat down in the chair. He stayed standing. 416 pages, she said. "I'm going to walk you through the structure, not the content, because the content will make you want to do something stupid, and I need you thinking." She opened the first box. The structure was this. Every document in it existed in pairs. On the left, the chart as it stood in the system today. On the right, the chart as it had stood before, pulled from a nightly export that ran at 11:50 p.m., and was retained for 72 hours and then overwritten, which meant that for 9 years she had been going into work on days off at hours when nobody was there to catch a version of the truth inside a 72-hour window before the building ate it. "He amens," she said. "That's the whole trick. He doesn't falsify at the time. Falsifying at the time is what a stupid man does, because at the time, there are 4 other people in the room who remember. He waits. 3 days, 11 days a month. Everybody's moved on. Nobody's rereading a closed chart, and he goes in at 2, 3 in the morning and moves one thing, a time, a sequence. Which order he was told something in." She tapped the box. "He never adds a lie. He reorders true facts until they produce a different conclusion. Same method he used on me. He's been doing it to me and to patients with the identical instrument, and I did not notice for 3 years that they were the same instrument." Cassius asked how many patients. That's the wrong question, she said. The right question is how many amendments? Because most of them are nothing. Most of them are a man fixing a typo at midnight because he's compulsive. I found 209 amendments made by his credentials outside of clinical hours over 9 years. She let that sit. 19 of them move something that matters. Of those 19, 11 are attached to a patient who died. Of those 11, 6 are attached to a family that never filed anything. Because why would they? The chart says he did everything right. He asked because he had to whether she was certain. And Ren Alcott looked up at him with an expression he had not seen on her before, and it was not offense. It was something closer to relief that somebody had finally asked her out loud. No, she said. I'm not certain about 6 of them. I'm a records archivist, not a physician. I can prove the record was altered. I cannot prove the alteration hid a mistake. Anybody who tells you those are the same thing as lying to you. She closed the lid. But I am certain about 3, and 3 is enough if the paper is clean. Then she reached over and put her hand on the shoebox, and she did not open it, and her whole manner changed. This, she said, is the part that matters. It was a shoebox, 9.5 by 13. Women's size 8, some brand that had gone out of business. The lid had been on and off so many times the corners had gone soft. Rosalie Duarte started at Tidewater in 1994, Wren said. Environmental services, night shift. She supervises 7 people now. She has been in the room for more code events than most of the residents in that building. Because when a patient goes bad, the first thing that happens is somebody yells for the floor to be cleared. And the person who was already on the floor with a mop does not get cleared. She gets moved to the corner and forgotten, and she watches the entire thing from 8 feet away. She took the lid off. Inside were notes, hundreds of them, on the backs of supply requisition forms on the cardboard, from linen packs on lined paper torn out of a spiral notebook in 3 different hands in 2 languages. Some of them dated, some of them not. Some of them signed with a first name and a shift. Some of them signed with nothing at all. They started writing things down because a woman named Teresa got blamed in 2009 for a fall she didn't cause, Wren said. So Rosalie told her crew from now on, you write down what you saw and you put the date on it. Not to accuse anybody, just so they'd have it. Her voice did something. 11 years. Nobody ever asked them for a single page. There is no form. There is no email box. There is no field in the entire information system of that hospital where the person who was standing in the room is permitted to say what she saw unless she has a license. Cassius said nothing. I found this box in 20, she said, in a locker in the basement, in a stack somebody was about to throw out during a renovation. I read 4 notes and I had to go sit in a stairwell. She put the lid back on carefully the way you'd close a coffin. One of them is from March 2016. It describes a 19-year-old on a gurney, and it describes who said what and in what order. And it is dated the day it happened, and it does not match the operative note. And the operative note was amended at 3:14 in the morning, 11 hours after the boy died. The storage unit was very quiet. So you have 2 records of the same night, Cassius said. I have 2 records of 11 different nights. Then you have him. And Ren Alcott laughed one syllable with nothing in it. No, she said, that's what I'm bringing you here to understand. I have nothing. I have 416 pages of the most useless paper in the state of Georgia. It took her 10 minutes to explain it, and he understood in 3, and the understanding arrived in his chest like a dropped weight. She had taken it. That was the whole thing. Every page in that unit had left the building in her bag. Some of it was protected health information belonging to patients who were not her. Some of it she had accessed with her own credentials on days she was not scheduled for reasons that had nothing to do with her job description, and every one of those access events was logged by the same system that logged Elliot's. Because the system did not care who you were, it only cared that you had touched something. Chain of custody, she said. The second I hand a page of this to anybody, the first question is, where did you get it? And the answer is, I stole it. And the moment I say that out loud, 3 things happen simultaneously, and none of them are recoverable. She counted them on her fingers, and she had clearly counted them on her fingers alone in a room several hundred times. 1, my license is gone, not suspended, gone permanently, and I never get it back because unauthorized access to protected records is the one thing my profession does not forgive, and it shouldn't. She held up 2. 2 federal charges, not maybe. HIPAA criminal provisions, wrongful disclosure, And I have 9 years of it, and there's a log with a timestamp on every single instance. 10 years exposure per count if they want to be ugly, and they will want to be ugly because the person explaining to a jury what I did will be a hospital attorney. 3. And 3, the one that actually matters. Every page becomes inadmissible, and every page becomes an exhibit for him, because he will not have to defend the amendments. He will not have to say one word about a 19-year-old boy. He will stand up in front of the board he now sits on and say, this is a former employee with a documented psychiatric history, which he wrote, who has been criminally accessing patient records for 9 years, which is true, who has a personal vendetta against me from a divorce, which is also true, and who broke into a system to manufacture a case. She dropped her hand, and every word of that is accurate. That's what I keep trying to tell you. He never has to lie. He just has to describe me. Cassius Ferrante stood in a storage unit in Garden City and felt the specific vertigo of a man who has spent 20 years being the answer to problems and has just met one that is allergic to him. So don't use the paper, he said. She looked up. Elliot Kearns is a man, he said. He has an address, he has a car, he has a schedule. He is 47 years old, and he is not protected in any way that means anything, because the protection he has is institutional, and institutions cannot be at his house at 11 at night. He said it evenly without any relish, which was somehow worse. You have spent 9 years building a case because you thought a case was the only door. It isn't. It isn't. I can make him not exist by Thursday. There would be no board seat, no hearing, no license, no chain of custody, and nobody in the state of Georgia would ever knock on your door about it. That is not a threat, and it is not a favor. It is a service I am actually able to provide. He watched her. She did not flinch. She did not gasp. She did not do any of the things a woman is supposed to do in a story when a dangerous man offers to solve her problem, and it took him a moment to understand why. She had already considered it. Years ago, she had sat with it in detail and rejected it, and she had her reasons rehearsed the way she had her 3 fingers rehearsed. Say you do it, she said. Thursday, he's gone. What happens Friday? Nothing happens Friday. Something happens Friday. She stood up. Friday, Tidewater Memorial holds a memorial service. They put his portrait in the surgical wing. There's a scholarship in his name by the end of the year. The hospital's public relations department writes 300 words about 2 decades of clinical excellence, and every one of those 209 amendments stays exactly where it is, forever unexamined, because you do not audit a dead man they just named a scholarship after. Her voice climbed for the first time. And Rosalie Duarte writes another note on the back of a linen form on a Tuesday night in Mui 7 and puts it in a shoebox because the box is still the only place it can go. You didn't fix a single thing. You removed one man from a machine that will produce another one in 18 months, and you left the machine. He'd be gone. He'd be a rumor, she said, and she said it like the word was an obscenity. That's the whole point. A man who disappears is a rumor, and a rumor can be argued with. 20 years from now, somebody's telling a story in a bar about a surgeon in Savannah who crossed the wrong people. And that story has him as the interesting one and me as the mob wife, and there is no page anywhere on earth that says what he did to that boy. She was fully upright now, all 5'3" of her. A man on the record is a fact. A fact doesn't care who's in the room. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't die when he dies. It sits in a filing system with a retention schedule, and it outlives every single person involved, and in 40 years a graduate student pulls it, and it says exactly what it said on the day it was entered. She put her hand on the file box. He put me in the record, she said. The only thing I have ever wanted, the only thing is to put him in it, not in the ground, in the record. And if you take that from me by being efficient, you will have done the exact same thing to me that he did, which is decide what I could survive without asking. There was a long silence in that unit. Then Cassius Ferrante, who had never in his adult life been talked out of an action once he had named it, said the only honest thing available to him. I don't know how to help you, and he said. I've never once solved anything the way you're describing. I know. I'm telling you plainly. I have one tool. I know. That's why I didn't marry you for your judgment. And then something that was almost a smile went across her face and was gone. I married you for your last name and offense. Itam. He drove her home, And neither of them spoke for the first 11 minutes, and then he asked the question that had been assembling in him since the moment he understood the trap. If the paper's poison, he said, what's the plan? Because you didn't spend 9 years building a bomb you knew you could never set off. That's not who you are. And Ren said, no, I didn't. Then what? I don't have it yet. She was looking out the window. I've had a shape of it for about 4 years. I know what it has to be. I need every single page of this to come out of that building clean, generated by their own systems, signed by their own people, timestamped by their own servers, handed to me by their own hands with their own seal on it. Not one page of it can have my fingerprints on the way it left. She rubbed her eyes. I know that's what it has to be. I have not figured out how a person with no license, no lawyer, no money, and no standing makes a hospital hand her its own evidence. And the review gives you 11 weeks. The review gave me 11 weeks. And it gave me 11 weeks ago. He looked over at her. It closes in 9 days, she said. Well, 9 days. She had not mentioned that at any point in 6 weeks, and Cassius understood with a flash of something that was almost anger and mostly awe that she had been walking around his house making tick marks and margins and eating standing up, while a 9-day fuse burned in her chest and had not once let it show on her face, because letting things show on her face was a habit that had been surgically removed from her a long time ago by a man with excellent hands. He said her name. Don't, she said, don't do the voice. What voice? The one where you're about to tell me it's going to be fine in that register the one men use. She turned. He had a version of that voice. Everybody has a version of that voice. Do not use it on me. He didn't. He drove. Then 4 blocks from the house, she said very quietly, Camille called me on Tuesday. He waited. My sister. She's vice president of compliance now. She got it in March. Ren's hands were flat on her knees. She called to tell me that Ida's doing a legacy system migration. It's a real thing, it's overdue. The old environment is from 1998, and it costs a fortune to maintain. She told me because she thought it was a nice piece of gossip. She has no idea what I do or what I have, or that any of this exists. She just likes to tell me about her job because it's the only thing we have left to talk about. And the migration decommissions the legacy archive environment. Everything before 2015 that hasn't been migrated forward gets validated, and anything that fails validation gets purged, and the retention clock resets to policy minimums. Cassius pulled into the drive and did not turn the engine off. How much of yours is in that environment? All of it, Ren said. Every pre-2015 amendment. The nightly export I've been pulling from is a legacy job. The 2016 boys' original operative note lives in a table that stops existing when they cut over. She turned her head and looked at him, and her eyes were completely dry, which by now he understood was the most alarming thing her face could do. 19 days. You said 9. The review closes in 9. The migration cuts over in 19. She got out of the car. So I have 9 days to survive an investigation into me, and 19 days to make a hospital voluntarily hand me evidence that stops existing on day 20. And I do not have a plan, and I do not have a lawyer. And I have one advantage in the entire world, and it is that nobody in that building has ever once looked directly at me. She went inside. Cassius sat in the car with the engine running for 4 minutes, which was 3.5 minutes longer than he had ever sat with a problem he could not hit. He broke his word to her at 9 o'clock that night, sort of. He did not open the folder. He never opened the folder. What he did was call Odile back and ask her one narrow question that had nothing to do with Ren. And it was this who initiated the Legacy Migration Project at Tidewater Memorial and when. Odile called back at 11:40. The project had been formally chartered in June. The business case had been written by an outside consultant, and the executive sponsor, the person whose signature moved it from a wish list to a funded initiative with a hard cut-over date, was the vice president of compliance, Camille Alcott. Cassius sat with that for a long minute, and then he asked Odile the second question, and this one he asked slowly because he already knew he was going to hate the answer. When in June? Paper moving, then Odile flat as a shipping manifest, charter signed June 11th. When did the records review of the archival department open? June 9th. 2 days. Cassius put the phone down on the desk and looked at it. 2 days after somebody opened an investigation into his wife's department, his wife's sister had signed a document that would on a specific calendar date destroy every piece of evidence his wife had spent 9 years assembling. And she had then called her sister to chat about it, casually like gossip. There were two readings. In one, Camille Alcott was exactly what she appeared to be, an ambitious executive who had inherited an ancient system and killed it because killing it was correct. And the timing was the kind of coincidence that happens constantly in large organizations and means nothing. In the other, Camille Alcott had been told something in the first week of June and had understood immediately what her sister was and had done the arithmetic a compliance officer does and had reached a conclusion and had acted on it within 48 hours with a signature. And the terrible thing, the thing that kept Cassius awake past 3, was that the second reading did not require Camille to be evil. It only required her to love the institution more than she loved her sister, or worse, to believe she was saving her sister from herself. To believe that if the evidence simply ceased to exist, Ren would have nothing to burn her life down with and would finally mercifully stop. He had spent his whole life around men who did harm on purpose. He was suddenly not sure which was worse. Ditto. He told her at 4:45 in the morning because that was when she came downstairs, and because he had decided somewhere around 2 that he was not going to be another person who managed her. He gave it to her in order, without softening. Charter date, review date, 2 days, executive sponsor. She listened all the way to the end without moving. Then she said, "Say the last part again." Camille signed the charter. No, the dates. Review opened the 9th. She signed on the 11th. Ren Alcott sat down on the second stair, which was not a thing she did, and put her forearms on her knees, and for about 40 seconds she was somewhere else entirely, and Cassius stood there and let her be. When she came back, her voice was different, smaller and much harder. "She's not panicking," she said. "That's one reading." "No, that's the reading." She looked up. "You don't know her. Camille does not panic, she files. That's her whole personality. She was 11 and I was 3, and our mother went into the hospital, and Camille wrote out a chore schedule on notebook paper and taped it to the refrigerator. That's how she loves people. She makes a system, and she puts them inside it, and then she believes she has saved them." Her jaw moved. Somebody told her in June. Somebody told her the archival department was under review and that her sister was the reason, and she sat with it for 2 days and then she solved it. She solved it the way she solves everything. She built a system that makes the problem stop existing on a specific date. For you or for the hospital. And Ren said the sentence that Cassius would carry for a long time. "She will genuinely believe it was for me," she said. "That's what's going to be unbearable. She's going to sit across from me at some point and explain that she was protecting me, and she is not going to be lying, and I am not going to be able to argue with her because from where she sits, it's true. I'm a woman with a criminal exposure the size of a house, and she made it go away." She stood up. "Everybody in my life has helped me by deciding what I was allowed to keep." She went to get her bag. "Where are you going? It's 5 in the morning. "Work," she said. "I have 9 days and a review to survive, and I am going to be at my desk at 6 like I have been for 9 years because the single most protective thing about me is that I am boring." She was not boring for very much longer. Day 1 of the 9, Ren did nothing but her job perfectly and pulled the shoebox out of the basement locker and moved it and told Rosalie Duarte nothing about why. Day 2, the outside attorney conducting the review requested her access logs for a 5-year window, and she provided them complete and unredacted within 40 minutes because they were going to get them anyway. And the only thing worse than a bad log is a slow one. Day 3, she sat in a conference room for 2 hours and answered questions from a man in a gray suit who was pleasant and thorough, and never once asked her a question she could not answer truthfully, and she left that room understanding that she was going to lose because he was not building a case about theft. He was building a case about volume. He did not need to prove she had done anything with the records. He only needed to prove she had touched more of them than her job required, and she had by a factor of about 900. Day 4, she came home and stood in the kitchen and told Cassius that she'd figured out the shape of the thing, and then she said she needed to talk to a lawyer she couldn't afford, and Cassius said he would pay for one, and she said no, and it was the first real fight they ever had. It lasted 20 minutes, and it was not about money. "I'm not taking a lawyer you pay for," she said. "That's pride. That's evidence." She slammed her hand flat on the counter, and the sound of it made her flinch at herself, and she pushed through the flinch and kept going, which he noticed. Every single thing about this ends up in front of somebody. And when it does, the story cannot be that a woman married a criminal and he bought her a lawyer and together they took down a surgeon. Because that story is good. That story is a great story. That story is the one Elliot's counsel wants so badly he'd pay you for it. She was breathing hard. I need to be a boring woman with a boring job who followed a boring procedure. I need to be unentertaining. The second I'm interesting, I lose. You're going to walk into this alone. Yes. That's not strength, Ren, that's. Don't finish that sentence. She pointed at him one finger and there was nothing frightened in it at all. You were about to tell me what my own decision actually is. He used to do that. He was so good at it that I stopped having thoughts of my own for 4 years. Her hand came down. You can be the wall. That's what I bought, and you have been exactly what I paid for, and I am grateful in a way I cannot say out loud. But you do not get to be the architect. The architecture is mine. It's the only thing I own. Cassius Ferrante looked at his wife and did the hardest thing he had done in a decade, which was nothing. All right, he said. All right. All right. What do you need that isn't force and isn't money? She was quiet for a second, thrown because she had braced for a war and hit an open door. A ride, she said finally. Thursday, and for you to not come inside. Day 5 Thursday, she went to see Rosalie Duarte in the parking deck at the end of a night shift, and she brought the shoebox and she gave it back. She put it in the woman's hands and told her in plain language what it was, what it might do, and what it would cost. She told her that if those notes were ever used for anything, Rosalie's name would be on a document inside a legal proceeding, and that a legal proceeding is a machine that pulls on every thread it can find, and that one of the threads it might pull was Rosalie's own paperwork, and that Wren knew and had known for 6 years that Rosalie's work authorization had lapsed in 2019 and had never been repaired. Rosalie held the box against her chest and did not say anything for a while. Then she asked one question, and it went through Cassius waiting in the car 40 feet away with the window down like a nail. If I say no, Rosalie said, does the boy from 2016 stay the way he is in the computer? Yes. Then that's not a question, Rosalie said. That's just you being polite. Wren said she needed her to understand the risk. And Rosalie Duarte, 52 years old, 11 years of night shifts, a woman whose entire recorded existence in that hospital consisted of a badge number and a payroll line, said the thing that ended the argument. Mija, I've been invisible since 1994. You know what's worse than getting caught? She tapped the lid of the box. 26 years of writing down what you saw and finding out at the end that nobody was ever going to read it. Day 6, the outside attorney sent a follow-up request. Day 7, he sent another. Day 8 at 4:11 in the afternoon with 1 day left in the review and 11 days until the cutover. Wren Alcott sat at her desk in the archival department of Tidewater Memorial and stopped trying to figure out how to get the evidence out of the building. She had been asking the wrong question for 4 years. She'd been asking how a person with no standing takes something from an institution. The answer sitting in front of her on a screen she had looked at 10,000 times was that she had standing. She'd had it the entire time, not as an employee, as a patient. She had been treated in that emergency department. Her body was in that system, and under both federal law and Georgia statute, a patient has an absolute right to demand a complete certified copy of her own designated record set, and the institution has a fixed number of days to produce it, and producing it requires them to search their own systems, generate the file, certify it, and hand it over under their own seal, with their own signature, with a timestamp through a channel that creates its own paper trail at every step. She would not be stealing anything. She would be making them do the searching. She sat there for a full minute with her hands in her lap. Then she opened the form and typed her own name into it, and in the field for the requested date range, she did not type a date range at all. She typed the maximum, everything, all of it, every system, every environment, every legacy table, including the one that stopped existing in 11 days. She hovered over the submit button. Because the moment she pressed it, the request would route automatically by policy with no human discretion involved to the office of the executive who signed off on all patient record disputes, to the vice president of compliance, to her sister. She pressed it at 4:19 p.m. She did not call Camille. She drove. She got as far as the on-ramp before she understood that she was about to do the single stupidest thing available to her, which was arrive at her sister's house at 9 at night, unannounced, suspended under criminal referral, and say something out loud that nobody would ever be able to prove she'd said. She pulled onto the shoulder. She sat there with the hazards on for 6 minutes. Then she turned around and drove home and sat down at the kitchen table and opened her laptop, and Cassius came in and found her typing, and she did not look up. "You're not going over there," he said. "No." "I'm writing it down," Ren said. "Every conversation I have from here to the end of this happens in writing or it doesn't happen. That's the rule now. That's the only rule." What she wrote was 4 sentences long. It went to the compliance mailbox, which was the one channel in that building that could not be quietly deleted, and it said that at approximately 6:05 a.m., an employee of Tidewater Memorial had received a telephone call from an internal hospital extension in which the caller referenced the employee's immigration status and connected it to potential participation in an investigation. It gave the extension. It gave the time. It stated that the recipient had documented the call contemporaneously. She did not name Camille. She did not have to. There were 11 phones on that extension block, and every one of them was in the compliance suite. Then she attached the audio file, bought the Rosalie call. That one she didn't have. The other one, 52 minutes and 18 seconds of Elliot Kearns in a records annex at 10:40 at night, explaining himself. She stared at the attach button for a long time. "Why now?" Cassius asked. "Because they're going to come for her," Ren said. "Rosalie, that's the whole play now. Discredit me, terrify her, and the box goes back to being a box." Her jaw moved. "I was going to hold this until a hearing. I was going to be clever. But clever is a luxury for people who aren't scared, and there's a 52-year-old woman in Garden City who has been scared since 20, and I am not going to spend her fear buying myself a better dramatic moment." She hit send at 9:47 p.m. It was the single most consequential thing she ever did, and it took 4 seconds and nobody saw it happen. At 6:15 the next morning, a woman named Priya Raman, who had been the privacy officer at Tidewater Memorial for 2 years and who had never once been given a reason to do anything, he opened her email before her coffee. She listened to 11 minutes of the file. Then she stopped it and closed her office door and listened to all 52. At 8:40, she walked upstairs and told the chief medical officer that she was invoking her independent authority under the Corporate Integrity Program, and that she was doing it in writing, and that she wanted his acknowledgement in writing, and that if she did not have it by end of day, she would be making her own report to the Office of Inspector General, as was her legal right and obligation. He gave her the acknowledgement in 90 minutes. At 11:20, a preservation hold went out to the entire Information Services Department, and the legacy migration cutover scheduled for the 28th was suspended indefinitely. Ren found out at 11:34 from an automated system-wide notice that still went to her personal email because nobody had thought to unsubscribe a suspended employee from IT announcements. She read it standing in the kitchen and had to put her hand on the counter. 9 years, 19 days, and in the end, the thing that saved the evidence was a woman she had never had a real conversation with, doing her actual job on a Tuesday morning because somebody had finally handed her a document she could not ignore. "What?" Cassius said. "They stopped the migration. Because of the audio." "Because of the email," Ren said, and her voice cracked in the middle of it. "The audio is why. The email is how. If I'd told her in a hallway, she'd have had nothing to hold." The proceeding took 11 weeks to assemble, and it was not one proceeding, it was 4 running in parallel, and Ren Alcott was a party to all of them and represented in none of them. That was her choice, and it was the last real fight she and Cassius had. He offered a firm in Atlanta with 9 partners. She said no. He offered to fund a retainer through a charitable trust with no visible connection to him, structured so cleanly that 4 attorneys had signed off that it was untraceable, and she said no to that too, and this time she explained it in a way he never forgot. "Every document in this case is going to be read by somebody looking for the trick," she said. "That's what defense is. Defense is a person with a highlighter looking for the one place the story stops being boring. And the second anybody finds a Fiorente dollar inside my representation, that's the headline. Not the boy, not the amendments, not Rosalie. The headline is Mob Wife Takes Down Surgeon, and I become the most interesting woman in Georgia, and Elliot Kearns becomes a man who was destroyed by organized crime. You'll be alone in that room." "I'll be ordinary in that room," she said. That's the only armor that works on this. She used the public advocacy clinic at the law school, a supervising attorney and two third-year students who had never handled anything bigger than a landlord dispute. They were earnest and underslept, and they did not have a single billable hour between them. And Wren did about 70% of the document work herself at the kitchen table, because there was exactly one thing in the world she was better at than almost anyone alive, and it was organizing paper. The medical board hearing was in Atlanta, and Elliot Kearns did not attend the first day because his attorney had filed for a continuance on the grounds that the complainant was under active criminal referral and therefore inherently unreliable. The continuance was denied in 11 minutes. Wren presented on the second day, and she did it herself, standing with a binder, and the supervising attorney sat behind her and said almost nothing, which they had agreed on in advance. She did not tell them about her marriage. She did not tell them about her arm, or the cabinet door, or the 6 visits. Not once, not in the entire hearing, and her clinic supervisor had begged her to, because it was the most humanizing material in the file and it would land. She refused, and her reason was the same reason for everything. If I put myself in it, it becomes about a divorce, she said. The second it's about a divorce, every man in that room relaxes because they all know what a divorce is and they all have a theory about them. It has to be about the boy. It has to be about a 19-year-old in a timestamp and nothing else, or he walks. So she stood in front of the Georgia Composite Medical Board and gave them arithmetic. She introduced 209 access events, and she did not editorialize about a single one of them. She introduced 19 amendments and walked through the 3 she could prove with the flat, unhurried delivery of a woman reading the chart aloud to a room of clinicians, which is exactly what she was. She showed them the original operative note and the amended operative note side by side, and she did not say the word lie once because the word was unnecessary and the word was arguable and the timestamps were not. And every single page she put in front of them had come out of Tidewater Memorial's own systems generated under the preservation hold, certified by the institution, signed by its own custodian of records, with its own seal in the corner. Elliot's attorney rose on the 4th day and made the argument everybody had been waiting for. He said the complainant had spent 9 years criminally accessing protected health information, that a referral was pending with the district attorney, that her credential was suspended, and that the entire evidentiary foundation of the matter was the fruit of a decade of unauthorized surveillance by an embittered former spouse. He was good. He was very good. Wren stood up and answered it in 90 seconds. That's true, she said. All of it. I did access records I had no right to access for 9 years, and I've admitted that in writing to the state, to the district attorney, and to this board in my initial filing, and I expect to lose my license permanently, and I expect to be prosecuted. She let it sit. But not one page in front of you came from me. Every exhibit in this record was produced by Tidewater Memorial under a litigation hold extracted by their Information Services Department, certified by their custodian of records, and signed by their privacy officer. She turned a page. I didn't bring you anything. I only told them where to look. If this board finds that a former employee's misconduct makes an institution's own certified records inadmissible, then every hospital in this state has just been handed a very simple method for making evidence disappear. And I don't think that's the finding you want to write. The chairman asked her one question. He asked why she hadn't simply reported it in 2016. And Wren Alcott, who had rehearsed nothing and had prepared for everything, stood there and gave the answer that ended up being the reason the whole thing mattered. Because there was nowhere to report it to, she said. I want to be precise about that because I don't think it's understood. In 2016, there was a hotline that routed to compliance, and compliance reported to a vice president, and the vice president reported to the executive committee, and the physician in question sat on 2 of the 3 committees that would have received it. That's not corruption. Nobody built that on purpose. It's just what happens when an institution designs its own nervous system. She closed the binder. The record only ever recorded what the credentialed people said. Everybody else in that building had eyes and no field to put them in. Elliot Kearns testified on the 6th day, and he did it against his attorney's explicit advice, and everyone in the room understood within 4 minutes why he'd insisted. He was magnificent. He talked about 1,406 patients. He talked about the trauma center. He talked about the difference between 9% and 14% with the specificity of a man who had genuinely lain awake with those numbers because he had. He was warm and self-critical, and he acknowledged the amendments without hedging and framed them as the errors of a man operating under sustained load. And there were people on that panel whose faces changed. Wren watched him do it and felt the whole thing tilting. And then on the afternoon of the sixth day, her clinic supervisor entered the recording. 52 minutes and 18 seconds. A records annex. 10:40 at night. One party consent lawfully obtained authenticated by metadata. No objections sustained. They played all of it. They played him saying, I amended 209 records. They played him saying, I was told about the pressure trend at 11:40, and I did not take him back until 12:20 and 40 minutes in. A kid like that is the whole thing, and I know it, and I have known it every day since. They played him saying 40 minutes is a lawsuit and 15 is a judgment call. They played him saying, you're the clerk. And they played him saying in that same warm, reasonable voice he had used for 2 decades on frightened families in waiting rooms. If I apologized and it cost me the license, I'd be lying because I'd do it again. All of it. Every time. Nobody in that room moved. I had not denied one single thing in 52 minutes. He had spent the entire recording explaining in exhaustive and articulate detail exactly why he had done all of it and why he considered himself correct. And the explanation was the confession, and there was no version of it. His attorney could carve away because he had said it in complete paragraphs with no interruptions and no ambiguity and no duress. The most destructive document in the case was one he had authored himself. At the break, his attorney did not speak to him. They found against him on all counts in 19 days. Revocation, not suspension. The written order used the phrase a sustained and self-justified pattern of documentary falsification, and it went into a public database that any patient in the state could search in under 30 seconds forever. He never got to be a rumor. That was the thing Wren cared about, and it was the thing almost nobody else understood. The district attorney's office charged him 11 weeks later with 2 counts under the state's records, falsification statute and 1 count of reckless conduct, and the case did not go to trial for 2 years, and Wren gave a deposition and sat in a hallway for 6 hours, and it was the least dramatic day of the entire affair. He pled 18 months and he served 11. The family of the 19-year-old from March 2016 filed a civil action 9 months after the board order, and their attorney called Wren once to ask a technical question about export retention windows, and she answered it in 4 minutes and never spoke to any of them again. And she did not attend anything, and she did not want to be thanked, and she was not. She read about the settlement in a newspaper. She sat with it for a while, and then she said something to Cassius that he didn't fully understand until much later. His name's in it, she said. The boy, in the order in the complaint in the docket. He's in the record now, in the right order with the right times. She folded the paper. That's all I ever wanted. That's the whole thing. He was in there wrong for 9 years, and now he's in there right. Camille Alcott was terminated on a Thursday. Not for the phone call. They could never prove the phone call, and Wren always believed they didn't try very hard, because proving it would have meant a hospital admitting that a vice president had used an internal line to threaten a witness with immigration enforcement. They terminated her for the 2 denials. 2 documents signed time-stamped with control numbers in the upper right corner, in which the vice president of compliance had refused a patient access to her own designated record set, citing a policy that did not exist. It was the cleanest possible finding, and it was the one thing she could not talk her way out of because she had built it herself in writing out of habit. The federal government had opened an obstruction inquiry. It took 14 months and ended in a deferred agreement in a bar from serving in any compliance function at any organization receiving federal health care dollars, which was for Camille Alcott, a kind of professional death that had no funeral. She asked to see Wren twice. Wren said no twice. Oh. The 3rd time, 8 months after the board order, she came to the house, and Cassius answered the door and did not let her in. And then Wren came down the hall and said it was fine, and went out and sat on the step with her sister for 40 minutes. Camille had lost weight. She had a folder with her because, of course, she did. I brought you, but I don't want a folder. Camille set it on the step between them anyway. I need you to know why, she said. I know why. You don't. Camille. Wren turned to look at her. You found out in June that there was a review of my department. Yeah, you did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic said your sister has 9 years of criminal exposure and no lawyer and no money. And you decided the kindest available act was to make the evidence stop existing. Because if it doesn't exist, I can't be prosecuted for having taken it, and I can't burn my life down with it, and I stay employed and boring and alive. She said it evenly. You signed the charter on the 11th. 2 days. You didn't even hesitate. And you have believed every single day since that you were saving me. Camille's mouth was trembling. I was, she said. I know you were. Then why? Because you didn't ask me. And there it was out loud, the sentence underneath 33 years. Not once, not in 2016 when you read my chart, not in June when you signed that thing. Not the morning you picked up a phone and called a 52-year-old woman at 6 a.m. and said her whole name at her. Ren's voice went hoarse. You knew about the 6 ED visits for 4 years, and you called me every month and asked about a headstone. He knew for 2 years, and he let me keep pulling records because he thought I needed a project. You both looked directly at me and decided what I was allowed to carry, and the only difference between the two of you is that he did it to protect himself and you did it to protect me, and I want you to hear me say this next part very clearly. She turned all the way around. It felt exactly the same from the inside, and she said, there was no difference. Not one day of it felt different. Camille put her face in her hands and cried on that step for a long time, and Ren did not touch her and did not leave. When it was over, Camille said, is there anything? Yeah, Ren said. Testify. When they call you about the extraction, sign off in the conflict of interest, tell them the whole thing, including your part. In writing on the record with your name on it, that's the last of my career. It's already gone, Ren said, but it's the first true thing you'd have ever put in a file. Camille did it 4 months later, 11 pages, and she did not minimize herself in a single line of it, and it was the single most useful document in the obstruction inquiry, and it was used against her. The sisters spoke about twice a year after that, never for long. It never got better and it never got worse, and Ren stopped needing it to be either. The part that mattered most did not happen in Atlanta. It happened in a windowless conference room at Tidewater Memorial 14 months later. As a mandatory term of the Corporate Integrity Agreement, the hospital signed with the federal government to keep its funding. They had to build a channel. That was the language, a non-clinical incident reporting mechanism accessible to all personnel, regardless of credential, with defined intake, defined retention, mandatory review, and anti-retaliation protection. Because the government's finding had not been that Tidewater Memorial had a bad surgeon. The finding had been that Tidewater Memorial had operated for 26 years with an information system that was structurally incapable of receiving testimony from the majority of the people inside the building. Priya Raman ran the working group. She invited Rosalie Duarte to sit on it. Rosalie came in her uniform because she had a shift after. And on the first day when they were arguing about the retention schedule and the field structure and whether the form should require the reporter's name, Rosalie Duarte put a shoebox on the conference table. 9.5 by 13, women's size 8, soft corners. You want to know what field you need, she said. Read these. They read them for 4 hours. 14 people around a table, half of them executives reading notes written on the backs of linen requisition forms in 3 hands and 2 languages by people whose entire recorded existence in that institution had been a badge number and a payroll line. Somebody asked how long she'd been keeping them. Since 2009, Rosalie said, Teresa got blamed for a fall she didn't cause. So I told my girls, write down what you see, put the date, and you never gave them to anybody. And Rosalie Duarte looked around that table at 14 people with lanyards and said the sentence that ended up printed verbatim in the preamble of the final policy document. Who was I supposed to give them to, she said. There was no place to put it. You think we didn't want to tell you for 26 years there was nowhere in this whole hospital for me to say what I saw. 11 months later, the system went live. The first 416 records entered into it were not new. They were digitized, time-stamped, attributed, and entered as the founding archive of the reporting channel, and the metadata on every one of them carried its original handwritten date from 2009 forward. Rosalie Duarte's name is on the policy as a subject matter contributor. It's on a plaque on the 4th floor that nobody reads, and it is in the retention schedule, which is better because plaques come down and retention schedules do not. Her status was resolved through a U visa certification, because the district attorney's office certified her as a witness in an active criminal proceeding involving obstruction and witness intimidation. And that certification existed because a 6 a.m. phone call had been made from an internal extension by a woman who could not stop herself from acting decisively. Camille Alcott's worst act became the legal instrument that protected the person she'd aimed it at. Nobody ever pointed that out to her. Wren considered it for about a week and then decided that some things are better left in the record than said in a room. Wren Alcott lost her license on a Tuesday. The state order was 4 pages long and it was correct in every particular, and she never once disputed it. Permanent revocation, no pathway to reinstatement, effective immediately. She had known it was coming from the moment she pressed submit at 4:19 on a Thursday afternoon 14 months earlier, and she had known it in the storage unit before that, and she had walked into all of it with her eyes open. The criminal referral resolved into a misdemeanor plea and 2 years of probation because the district attorney's office presented with a 9-year pattern of unauthorized access that had resulted in the revocation of a surgeon and the reconstruction of a hospital's reporting infrastructure, elected not to make a career-defining example out of a 34-year-old records clerk. They still charged her. She still pled. It's still there in a public database permanently next to his. She came home from the courthouse and sat down at the kitchen table and did not take her coat off for 20 minutes. Cassius sat down across from her and didn't say anything, which he had gotten much better at. "I keep waiting to feel something," she said finally. "Give it time." "No, that's not," she rubbed her face. "I thought I'd feel relief or victory. There's supposed to be a part where you feel like you won." She looked at her hands. "I did the arithmetic on this 1,000 times in that storage unit. I always knew what it cost. I just never once sat down and actually pictured being a person who isn't allowed to do the only thing she was ever good at. You're good at more than that." "Don't," she said it gently. "Please don't do the encouraging thing. I need to be allowed to have lost something." So he stopped and he sat with her and he let it be exactly as bad as it was, which was the single hardest and most useful thing Cassius Ferrante had ever done for another human being. After a while, she said, "The federal thing on the terminals closes next month, the 11th. "How bad?" "Both terminals. The ocean terminal lease is gone outright. Garden City becomes a consent decree operation with a federal monitor sitting in my office 3 days a week for 4 years. He said it flat without self-pity. "About 40%. And you're not going to fight it. There's nothing to fight. The paper's bad exactly like you said it was in that memorandum. You were right in June and you were right about everything else, and I've stopped being surprised by it." Wren looked at him for a long moment. "That was my father's," Cassius said. "Both of them, 22 years. He bought the ocean lease the year I turned 20. "I know. I thought I'd feel worse." He turned the glass on the table a quarter turn. "I keep waiting for that, too." And Wren Alcott laughed, actually laughed for the first time in 14 months, one short cracked syllable in a quiet kitchen. "Look at us," she said. "Two people sitting here waiting to feel something about the things we lost on purpose." Cassius almost smiled. "You know what the worst part is," she said. "I would do all of it again, every single day of it, and then I'm never going to be able to explain that to anybody who wasn't in that annex at 10:40 at night." "You don't have to explain it to anybody." "I know." She stood up and finally took her coat off. "That's the part I'm still getting used to." It took her 4 months to figure out what she was. That was the part nobody warned her about. She had spent 9 years being a woman with a mission and 14 months being a woman in a proceeding, and then one Tuesday it was all simply over. And she woke at 4:40 because she always woke at 4:40, and there was nothing on the other side of it. She did not handle it well, and she would say so afterward without dressing it up. She reorganized the kitchen. Twice. She alphabetized a bookshelf that did not need alphabetizing, and then she sat on the floor in front of it and understood exactly what she was doing, which was looking for something to make orderly, because order was the only relationship with the world she had ever been permitted to have. Cassius found her there at 11 at night. "You want to talk about it?" "No, all right. I'm 34 years old, and I can't hold a job that touches a record system," she said to the bookshelf. "Not a hospital, not a clinic, not an insurer, not a billing company, not a law office, not a nursing home. The revocation is in a national database. Anybody who runs a background check finds a misdemeanor, and a permanent bar in 11 seconds. She laughed without any humor in it. I built my entire life around being the person who reads the paper, and now the paper reads me. He didn't try to fix it. He'd learned. What he said was, "What did you do at that hospital that wasn't the license?" She was quiet for a while. "What do you mean?" "You had a license for 9 years, and the license didn't do the thing you did. The license lets you access a system. It doesn't tell you which system to look in, or what a 72-hour export window is, or that a denial with a control number is worth more than a shouting match." He shrugged. "I've watched you do this for 2 years. Not one useful thing you did required a credential. It required knowing where paper lives." Ren sat with that on the floor for a long time. Then she said, "Anybody can request their own chart." "Yes. Anybody, any patient, any employee, any person who's ever been treated anywhere. It's a federal right. It costs nothing." She was talking faster now. "And almost nobody does it. And the ones who do get denied, and when they get denied, they go away because they don't know that the denial itself is a document, and they don't know there's a 15-day clock, and they don't know that if you copy the right mailbox, it can't be deleted. So teach them. You don't need a license to help somebody fill out a form," Ren said, and her voice had changed entirely. "You don't need a license to tell a woman that her employer legally has to give her a copy of her own personnel file, or that a denial email is worth keeping, or that she should write down the date." She looked up at him. "That's not a job," she said. "It could be. There's no money in it. The people who need it are exactly the people who can't pay for it." Cassius said, "Then it's a good thing you married a man with an office building he can't legally use for anything else anymore." The storefront was on Gwinnett Street, 4 blocks from the container gate, in a strip that had a bail bondsman on one end and a check cashing place on the other, which Ren said was the correct company to keep because it meant the foot traffic was already people. The system had done something too. They fought about the lease for 2 weeks. He wanted to give it to her. She wanted a document. What she ended up with was 11 pages drafted by her, executed by both of them, and reviewed by an attorney. She paid $400 of her own money to look at a commercial lease at fair market rate, with a rider converting the first 36 months of rent into an unsecured loan at a stated interest rate with a repayment schedule with a default provision with her signature on every page. Cassius read it and put it down and said, "You've made me your landlord." "Yes. You understand I don't want this money." "I understand that completely." She capped her pen. "And you understand that I spent 7 years living inside a man's generosity, and the whole time I couldn't leave because there was nothing I could point to that was mine. He gave me everything. That's how he did it. That's the entire mechanism." She slid the pages across. "A gift is a leash. It doesn't matter how much you love the person holding it. I have worn one. I'm not wearing another one, not even yours, not even a nice one." He signed it. Then he said, "For the record, I think it's a good business." "It isn't. It isn't. I said what I said." She almost smiled. They called it the Alcott Records Office because Ren refused every clever name the third-year law students proposed on the grounds that people who are frightened do not walk into a place with a clever name. It was 400 square feet, 2 desks, a printer that jammed, and a filing cabinet. Nobody came for 11 days. She sat in there from 7 in the morning until 6 at night for 11 days and read the federal rule set until she could recite the timelines from memory. And on the 11th day at 10 past 4, a man named Curtis Ivy pushed the door open and stood in it like he was ready to leave. He was a longshoreman, 58. He'd been hurt on a lift in 2019 and had been fighting a workers' compensation denial for 3.5 years, and he had a plastic grocery bag with paper in it. He put the bag on her desk and said, "They keep telling me they never got my forms." Ren looked in the bag. "Do you have the certified mail receipts?" "The what?" "Did you mail any of it certified? Green card comes back with a signature." "I don't—" He stopped. "My wife did one in 2020. I think she did one." "Find it," Ren said. "That's the whole case." It took her 9 weeks. She did not represent him because she couldn't, and she said so in writing on the first day and had him sign an acknowledgement that she was not an attorney and was not providing legal advice. What she did was teach a 58-year-old man how to make an institution generate paper about itself. He requested his complete claim file in writing with a statutory citation. He got denied. She showed him that the denial was the good news. He resubmitted with the denial attached and copied the state board. They produced the file in 6 days. And in the file was an internal note dated 11 days after his injury from an adjuster to a supervisor acknowledging receipt of the forms the company had spent 3.5 years saying it never received. Curtis Ivy sat in that 400-square-foot office and read a piece of paper that proved he had not been crazy for 3.5 years, and he put his hand over his mouth and did not say anything for a long time. Then he said it was in there the whole time. It's always in there, Wren said. That's the thing nobody tells you. They almost never destroy it. They just never hand it over because nobody in your position has ever known how to make them. He came back 2 weeks later with 4 other men from the terminal. By the end of the first year, she had seen 611 people. She kept the number in a ledger by hand because she liked ledgers and because a number that a person writes down every night is a number that person believes. Longshoremen, nursing home aides who'd been written up for things they hadn't done, a woman who needed her mother's complete hospital record and had been told for 2 years that it would cost $900, which was a lie, because federal rule caps the fee at the cost of labor and supplies, and Wren got it for her for $11.40. 2 men who'd been fired from a poultry plant and had never once seen their own personnel files. A 20-year-old with a school disciplinary record that said something different than what her mother had been told on the phone. None of it was dramatic. That was the entire point of it. She said so constantly to the law students who rotated through and kept wanting it to be dramatic. "You want a moment," she told one of them, a young man named Dev, who kept drafting demand letters with adjectives in them. "There's no moment. There's a form and a timeline and a copy to the right mailbox, and then you wait 15 days. That's it. That's the whole art. The reason they win is that they've bet their entire business model on you getting bored and going away." She handed the letter back. "Take the adjectives out. Adjectives are how they know you're new." She hired Curtis Ivy part-time in year 2 because he could talk to men at the terminal in a way she never could, and because a 58-year-old longshoreman saying "I did this and it worked" moved more people through that door than any amount of expertise. Rosalie Duarte came in on Thursdays after her shift and ran the intake for anyone who spoke Spanish, which was about a third of them, and she was extraordinary at it because she had spent 26 years watching people be frightened in rooms, and she knew exactly what to say first. What she said first every time was, "Did you write down the date?" "Write down." The federal monitor moved into Cassius's office on a Monday in March and did not leave for 4 years. His name was Aaron Pell. He was 41, he had the personality of a filing cabinet, and Cassius Ferrante loathed him for approximately 6 weeks, and then somewhere around the middle of the 7th stopped. What happened was that Pell found a discrepancy in a bonded warehouse log that Cassius had inherited in 2011 and had never understood, and instead of writing it up, he walked into the office and asked whether Cassius knew that his own manifests had been double-counting bonded transfers for 8 years in a way that made his throughput numbers look 13% better than they actually were. They had. Cassius had been making decisions on a number that was wrong for 8 years. He sat with that for a day. Then he did something that would have gotten him laughed at by every man his father had ever worked with. He asked the federal monitor to teach him the reporting standard. The Ferrante organization at the end of those 4 years was about 60% the size it had been. 1 terminal, a consent decree, a permanent compliance function with 2 full-time employees, and a document retention policy that ran to 41 pages, which Wren had drafted at the kitchen table on a Sunday and had refused payment for. It was also for the first time in its history legal in every respect that mattered. Boone Isles quit in year 3. He was decent about it. He'd been with Cassius 11 years, and he sat down and said he hadn't signed up to be a logistics manager, and Cassius said he understood, and they shook hands, and Boone went to work for somebody in Charleston who still did things the old way. 14 months later, Boone was indicted, and Cassius read about it on his phone at the kitchen table and set the phone down and did not say anything for a while. "You okay?" Wren said. "That was going to be me." "I know." "No, I mean the actual case. 2 of those counts are things I did in 2016. He rubbed his eyes. "The only difference between me and Boone is that a woman walked into my office with a 2-page memo and told me my paper was bad." Wren didn't say anything. "You know what he asked me," Cassius said, the day he left. "He asked what happened to me. He'd been trying to figure it out for 3 years, and he finally just asked." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth. I said I couldn't hit made me useless, and being useless was the first honest thing that ever happened to me. Their second wedding was in year 4, and it was 9 people. Not because it was romantic to do it again, but because the first one had been a transaction executed in a county office by a clerk who did not look up. And because Ren had said one night in November out of nowhere that she had never in her life chosen a single thing about her own marital status. I got married the first time because I was 26, and he explained to me why I should, she said. I got married the second time because I needed a wall. Both times somebody's argument did it. She was looking at nothing. I have never once done it because I woke up and wanted it. Cassius, who had gotten very good at not filling silences, waited. I want it, she said. Say the rest. That's the rest. I want it. That's the whole sentence, and I've never gotten to say it before. They did it at the office on Gwinnett Street on a Saturday because she wanted it in the room she had built and with a loan she was still paying back, and the 9 people were Curtis Ivy and his wife Rosalie Duarte and her daughter Priya Raman, 2 law students, and a judge who owed the clinic a favor. Camille was not there. She had been invited. She'd written back a 2-page letter because of course she had, and Ren read it once and put it in a drawer and did not answer it for 11 months and then answered it in 4 sentences. They spoke twice a year for the rest of it. That was the truth of it, and Ren stopped apologizing to people for it around year 6. Elliot Kearns was released after 11 months and moved to Ohio and worked as far as anybody knew in medical device sales. He wrote her one letter in year 5. It was 4 pages. It was articulate and self-aware, and it was not an apology. It was an explanation, and it contained the sentence, I have had a great deal of time to think about the arithmetic, and I have concluded I was correct about the numbers and wrong about the authority I assumed in doing the arithmetic at all. Ren read it standing up in the office at 7 in the morning. Then she made a copy, sent the copy to the district attorney's office as a matter of routine because contact from a defendant in a resolved matter was a thing the office had asked to be informed of, and put the original in a file folder and labeled it and put it in the cabinet. Cassius asked that night whether she was going to answer it. No. You want to talk about what was in it? He said he was right about the numbers. She was doing dishes. He's probably right about the numbers. 1,400 people, 9%, all of it. I've never disputed that. Then what? She turned the water off. He thinks it was a math problem, she said. It was never a math problem. He had a 19-year-old on a TARDIS in 40 minutes, and he made a decision, and that's not a crime. That's medicine. That's being a person with a hard job. He could have written it down exactly the way it happened and lived with it, and the family would have had a true page, and maybe they'd have sued him, and maybe they'd have lost. She dried her hands. The crime was going in at 3 in the morning and moving 15 minutes because that wasn't about the numbers. That was about not being willing to be a man who was in the record wrong. She hung up the table. He wanted to be the author, she said. That's it. That's the entire thing, and it's the same thing he did to me for 7 years. He wasn't trying to win an argument about what happened. He was trying to be the only person allowed to write it down. So the office was in its 7th year when the number crossed 4,109 people in a hand-kept ledger in a 400-square-foot storefront between a bail bondsman and a check-cashing place. 3 paid staff by then, in a rotating clinic partnership in a second location in Brunswick, that Ren visited twice a month and did not control on purpose because she had learned in a hospital what happens when everything routes through one person. She was not famous. That mattered to her enormously. A reporter from Atlanta came down in year 6 wanting to write the whole story, the marriage and the surgeon and the mafia and all of it, and Ren gave her 4 hours and then declined to participate. You'll be helping people, the reporter said. Nobody knows this office exists. The people who need it know. You could be helping thousands more. And Ren said, if you write that story, the only thing anybody remembers is who I'm married to. And then every woman who walks in that door is walking into a mob story instead of an office. I've spent 7 years being unentertaining on purpose. It's the most valuable asset I own. The reporter wrote it anyway eventually in a smaller form, and it ran, and for about 3 weeks it was a thing, and then it wasn't because Ren gave it nothing to feed on. The one line she did give her, when the woman pushed for something anything about what it had all been for, was the line the piece ended on. People think power is force, Ren said. It isn't. Force is loud and it expires. Power is being the one who decides what goes in the file. He had that for 20 years over patience and over me, and the day he lost it, he lost everything, and he never once laid a hand on anybody in a courtroom to make it happen. The last thing, year 9 years almost to the week from a Tuesday morning when a woman had walked into a freight office on Bay Street with 2 pages and a costume of invisibility. She woke at 5:02 in the morning. Not from anything. There was no sound in her throat and no hand at her face, and nothing on the other side of the dark that needed to be talked out of hitting her. She simply surfaced the way people do and lay there for a moment in a house that was not holding its breath. Beside her, Cassius Ferrante was asleep. That was the part she noticed, and she lay very still with it. The man who had not slept a full night since he was 26, who had spent 2 decades lying in the dark, running the arithmetic on which name had gone quiet, was asleep at 5 in the morning, with his mouth slightly open, breathing like an ordinary person because there was nothing left in his life urgent enough to keep him awake. He had lost 40% of everything his father built. He had a federal monitor in his office, 3 days a week, in a compliance department, and a document retention policy his wife had written on a Sunday. He slept like a man who had never been afraid of anything. Wren lay there and understood something she had been circling for 9 years, which was that she had walked into that freight office looking for a wall and had bought one, and the wall had turned out to be the least important thing either of them got out of it. She got up at 5:20 because the office opened at 7. There was a woman coming in at 9. Her name was Evelise Marchand. She was 46. She had worked 11 years as a night aide at a long-term care facility in Pooler, and she had been terminated 4 months ago for a medication error. She said she had reported to 2 supervisors in advance and in writing. There was no record of it. That's what the facility said. No record. Wren had read the intake form 3 times, and she knew exactly what it was because it was the same shape. It was always the same shape. A woman with no credential in a building that only recorded what credentialed people said, who had done the one thing she could think of to protect herself, which was to write it down. Ivelisse Marchand had kept a notebook, 11 years of them, in a plastic bin in her garage because nobody had ever once asked her for a single page. Wren made coffee in a quiet kitchen and thought about a shoebox with soft corners and about a hospital that had needed a federal consent decree to build a field where a cleaner could say what she saw, and about how many buildings there still were in the state of Georgia where that field did not exist. She wrote the date at the top of a fresh page in the ledger. At 6:40, she let herself out. Cassius was still asleep, and she did not wake him, and she stood in the doorway for a second and looked at him, and then she went because there was work. She unlocked the office at 6:52. She turned on the lights and started the coffee and pulled a clean intake folder, and she wrote Marchand I on the tab in block capitals, and she opened the file drawer and made a space for it, and then she sat down and waited for 9 o'clock. They took her marriage and her health and her sister and her name and her license, and every one of those was something a person or an institution had the power to hand her and take back. The record was the only thing that had never belonged to any of them, and it was the only weapon nobody ever thought to take from her, and it was the one that held.